Next guest from 3 Down Nation, Justin Dunk, also part of our Rider broadcast team. Man, there was a lot of fun football to watch this weekend, Justin. Thanks for taking time to chat.
Yes, indeed, there was. Lots of CFL action in the playoffs. Some seasons ending, some continuing. A lot of goodies, too.
So let's start right there. West Final matchup is set. Saskatchewan versus BC, Mosaic Stadium this Saturday. That crowd is going to be wild. Now, I know this is kind of a typical Rust versus Rest type of conversation here, but who do you think has the advantage when you see BC coming in on a hot streak and momentum on their side, but then you also have the resting Riders who have had quite a bit of time to digest some game tape?
It's the Riders.
Yeah.
I definitely think BC, got away with one in that West semifinal because of Calgary's lack of proper clock management or malpractice, however you want to describe it. I think the Saskatchewan team is just so focused and built on going 1-0, and we've seen it essentially no matter who's in the football game, that this team can compete with anybody, namely the BC Lions in that last regular season game. So I think the Rough Riders are decidedly the favorite in the West Final.
The Riders return to the practice field tomorrow, Justin. What are you going to be looking for most? There's been a couple of injuries there, so what stands out to you?
Definitely the receivers and how that plays out. They're deep at that position, both American and Canadian. But who's healthy? Is Dante Myers out there looking spry and ready to go? What about Keyshawn Johnson, who was their leading receiver this season? Is Joe Robustelli out there to sort of push the competition? What does that look like? I think, based on what we saw at the end of the regular season, that it seems like all of the Canadians should be good to go. The stars would be Sam Emilus and Keane Schaefer-Baker. And I think Mitch Picton made an argument to potentially be on that West Final roster. I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but I think with what we saw from him, he's a guy that has shown time and time again, when called upon, he can make some clutch plays. So I'm looking at the receiver group.
I tried asking head coach Corey Mace last week. He wouldn't show any of his cards, but we wanted to find out about Tommy Stevens there. So what's that short yardage going to look like? I think there's quite a few storylines to follow here. You're going to be busy this week, Dave.
Well, you're right. And the good news was Tommy Stevens last week was fully sprinting on the field, which I thought was good. But speaking, Justin, I want to get back to your comment for just a second when it came to Dave Dickinson and the clock management at the end of the first half, Calgary, BC. What did you see there? Because there still was a timeout on the clock that they could have called to stop it to kick a field goal to get within even closer to what BC had put up on the board earlier.
Yeah, I thought it was more on Vernon Adams Jr., to be quite honest, holding that football so long, scrambling around, and then throwing up a lob ball, for lack of a better term, down the field that ate up all that clock. So I think there is, that coaching factor in there with the timeout on the board where you could have said, okay, let's call a timeout. Let's reset here. Make sure we know what we're doing with 9 seconds on the clock. We're going to call a quick pass, get down, and then have the opportunity to kick a field goal, or perhaps we're just going to kick a field goal right then and there to ensure we get that opportunity. That part of it, I think, is easy to say in hindsight, but you couple that mistake with the Rene Paredes, doink off the upright, for lack of a better term, that's 4 points right there. And then you go to the end of the game where the Stampeders leave time on the clock for the best player in the Canadian Football League, Nathan Rourke, to get his team in field goal position for Sean White to kick a walk-off winner. That game should have easily ended with the Stampeders trying a field goal for the win, and that's it. But it didn't end that way.
So what did the Stampeders do so well against BC? You look at the numbers, and Nathan Rourke didn't have a healthy day, if you will. Again, he's
There's
up
some
over
pressure.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And James Butler, right? The guy seems to have turned I don't know what you call it, just seems to have turned a corner in the last third of the season where he could do no wrong. But Calgary, without Flo or Remalade, seemed to have found an answer.
Definitely. That front seven or front six, however you want to describe it in the CFL, played really well for Calgary. Jalen Hutchings had a stout game up front, and Clarence Hicks, I thought, was pretty good on the outside. They were just sound and consistent in their gaps, and they didn't allow Nathan Rourke to have too many plays. There was one key play there, though, where he escaped out the backside and had a big run and then came back and finished that drive himself with another touchdown run off a zone read look. But to me, that's the strength of the Calgary defense, is that front. And I think that's why, largely Nathan Rourke and James Butler, specifically James Butler, I should say, were held in check.
Okay, take me to the East for a minute, because things are blowing up in Winnipeg. Mike O'Shea's in, Mike O'Shea's out. Jason Hogan may or may not be around. All I'll tell you is that Brady Oliveira ran the ball 8 times, and the last time that the Rough Riders were in Winnipeg, fans were booing the play caller because they didn't like what they saw coming out. I can only imagine what's bubbling over in the Manitoba capital.
I can imagine if Brady Oliveira was given some truth serum that he would probably boo Jason Hogan for parts of this season. And he was a little bit vocal about it too, right? Talking in the media that he wanted to get the football more, especially in and around the Labor Day matchup and that loss against the Saskatchewan Roughriders. Now, Brady Oliveira is a pending free agent, but you'd be hard-pressed to think that he could leave. There was lots of money put on the table for him the last time around when this happened. I think it was up to $275,000. The Ticats were really interested, and so were the BC Lions, but he elected to stay for less with Winnipeg with an eye towards this potential home Grey Cup. Didn't happen, but I think with the relationships there and the fact that he's a hometown boy, that should give at least the Bombers a leg up. But he has shown he's at least been willing to entertain other teams. As for Mike O'Shea, who is on an expiring contract, and from what I'm told, these coaching and head coaching contracts actually expire like at the end of the year, so December 31st. In this case, it would likely be with O'Shea. John Hodge, my colleague at 3 Down Nation, questioned him, I thought, very well today. And it seems like when O'Shea, talks about the community and the fact that he's been there for so long, and he feels like people that just pass through don't really understand the community that's in Winnipeg, that he would like to stay there, but there are steps to go to figure this out, because the general manager, Kyle Walters, his contract is expiring after this season as well. So you have some pieces at the top here that have to get figured out before you can start re-signing a guy like Brady Oliveira on a big money contract.
I will say, after the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were knocked out of the playoffs, I made the mistake of going on some of those CFL groups on Facebook, and it just turned into a Grey Cup buying and selling page. They're pretty fired up about being knocked out at this point. But let's take it even further east, Justin. Hamilton Tiger Cats, Montreal Alouettes. What are you seeing here?
The Montreal Alouettes on the betting line, at least at this moment in time, are the favorites on the road in Hamilton. And I think rightfully so. This team with Davis Alexander clearly plays at a different level. All the numbers back it up. He's 12-0 now as a starter, regular season, 11-0 postseason, 1-0 so far. And I think this guy's about to blow up from a stardom perspective. Like, if he even just gets to the Grey Cup and he keeps trash talking his opponents and then going out and throwing for a single game career high 384 yards, people are going to start liking the charisma. But then there's going to be the other side of it where the opposing fans are going to hate the guy, which is a great character to have in the Canadian Football League. I think he is that good. He means a lot to this football team. You look at, all of the metrics that he impacts from a statistical perspective, it's unbelievable. But the one that matters most is wins and losses. And I look at this for the East Final. I think there's an advantage here for Montreal because Davis Alexander actually didn't play either game this year between these two teams. He was out with that hamstring injury when they played both times. And I think that could be an advantage for Montreal because this Tiger Cats defense hasn't seen him, at least this season, live and in action on the field. Plus, you have these weapons that are, I would say, coming into their own. I think Austin Mack hasn't lived up to expectations in the regular season, but he had a number of big catches in that East semifinal. Tyson Philpott was doing his thing. Charleston Rambo had a big deep ball. And I think there's a lot of playmakers that can hurt you. And then Stevie Scott III, their running back, had his best career game in the East semifinal. So this offense is rolling. The offensive line is really good. Noel Thorpe has a defense flying around. I'd be hard-pressed to see Hamilton winning this football game, but that said, they have a bunch of weapons and a 5,000-yard passer in Bo Levi Mitchell.
How about the mental fortitude of the Montreal Alouettes? So Sean Lemon indefinitely suspended at the start of the year. They lift that. He comes back into the lineup. And then for an off-field incident that the CFL investigated, made a ruling on suspending Sean Oakman indefinitely. And then the Montreal Alouettes going ahead and releasing him literally 48 hours before they play a semifinal playoff game. what does that speak to in the coaching staff and the organization of Montreal to keep it together? Because stuff like that can pull a group apart real quick.
It definitely could. And a lot of people thought, okay, that's why Winnipeg's going to run the football with Brady Oliveira, because you have Mustafa Johnson, who's out with an injury, who's arguably an all-star level player in the Canadian Football League at the defensive tackle position, not playing in that game. And then you have Sean Oakman, who's out. He actually was an all-star this year in the East Division. And in comes Corey Robertson Jr., who had a solid game, 3 tackles, a forced fumble. But you just sort of stick that cog in there with what Noel Thorpe does in his multiple looks, keeping quarterbacks and offenses off balance. And I feel like that helped the Alouettes overall. But you're right. There was just a championship level focus with this team not to flinch when one of their key players on defense came out with a suspension leading into that game on Friday night.
Were you surprised, Tegan, that nobody's given Hamilton love? You've seen them play up close and personal with Bo Levi Mitchell. And I still don't think Bo Levi's getting as much attention as he should for the year that he put up.
You know what? I got to admit, I think this is going to be a closer game than a lot of people are giving it credit for. I think so, but I'm also not in a position to be discounting anyone.
No, but still.
You know what? I think it's going to be a tighter game. And obviously things are going to change throughout the week as we kind of see how that roster shapes up. And I don't want to get to free agency talks just yet because there's still lots of football to be played here. We still got 2 weeks left, boys. But I want to know how Justin's feeling after that Jays loss. How's your blood pressure?
That was devastating. I mean, everybody's talked about it. So many runners left on base, and you just felt like, okay, there's going to be a Joe Carter moment here. But after it was over, I just shut the game off and went right to bed, tried to forget about it. So let's stop talking about it. I don't want to think about it.
You can tell Justin wasn't the one that won the $25 million 50-50.
Yeah. In all honesty, though, like for us as fans, right, we live it. We go through, again, it's like a stage of mourning. But as an athlete, I could not comprehend. And I did not comprehend until I was talking with some of the riders from the 2009 team and understanding how 16 years later, that sting is still there. Like, I can't imagine trying to overcome this. Like, again, I've never been that level of athlete that would have to overcome something. Yeah, I got cut from my grade 6 team, but that probably could have happened any day, any time in my athletic career. But what I'm saying is, how do you get over that?
I think you just have to as a pro. And that's why those guys don't flinch in the moment. The Toronto Blue Jays, I felt like, didn't look nervous at all in Game 7 and went down fighting. And, when I think of these kinds of moments in pro sports, it's so often like inches, seconds, millimeters that decide legacies. Like, we're talking about some centimeters on the bat where Miguel Rojas hit that Jeff Hoffman ball out of the park. Like, if he hits it a little more off the end, it doesn't go out. I'm not saying that the Jays should have won. I'm just saying it's so small, like some of these details. You go back to 2009 and some of those great rider teams that didn't win Grey Cups. And it's just these key details that happen or things that can be totally random that decide a legacy. It just sort of gives you a perspective into how big these moments can be, but how small the details can be that decide them.
I don't know if did anybody else catch going into the extra inning, by the way, and I know this is way off topic, but you know what, if you wanted, Ernie Clement is not a Canadian citizen, but he might as well have earned it. When in extra times, he goes by the camera bay and asks Hazel May, hey, you doing all right? While they're in the midst of Game 7 World Series extra innings, you doing all right? Like, who does that? That's so Canadian.
I get it. It's nice. But, to be quite honest, I feel like too many people in the media, especially in Toronto, became cheerleaders. Like, I get it. It's Game 7, right? And Hazel May probably wants the Jays to win. But I feel like that bias was a little tilted towards the Jays, and rightfully so. They're a Canadian team. I guess that's just the journalist coming out of me.
Yeah, why you got to be such a party pooper there, Justin?
Yeah. Sorry.
You know what? For every champagne shower, there is also devastation on the other side. So it just didn't go the Jays' way this year. But you know what? We have football. to look forward to this weekend. And you can, of course, hear Three Down Nation's Justin Dunk, part of our Rider Broadcast Network crew. We're going to be on the air this Saturday, so we'll be looking forward to that matchup at Mosaic Stadium. Thanks for the time, Justin.
Thanks for having me on. Let's do it Saturday.
Let's go.